With hindsight, the WWF's Attitude Era was a clear exercise in contradiction. It was a time period where the WWF could do no wrong in the eyes of their insanely large audience, and yet, through most objective measures, they did put on some really lousy pay-per-views. Really lousy pay-per-views that made a lot of money, but lousy pay-per-views nonetheless. I mean, 2010's The Last Airbender was panned by critics and audiences, and some even call it one of the worst films of all time, but it still made over $300 million at the box office. Of course, M. Night Shyamalan isn't the only shot caller capable of producing nonsense that's laden with needless swerves. In fact, today's video concerns the booking of his non-union pro wrestling equivalent, Vince Russo. And oh, old Vinny Roo could swerve us all, subverting our expectations better than anyone. Unfortunately, our expectations were usually for a good show, so a swerve would mean, well, something like the show we're about to cover. You take a dull tournament, a badly overbooked world title match, and a show-ending swerve that put the FU in fun times, and you'll see why sometimes the word attitude could be preceded with piss poor. The 1999 King of the Ring is one of the worst shows ever. In one sense, this is going to be a slight departure from the typical worst shows ever entry. Usually, the selected events sum a promotion's low point up pretty well, like the 1995 King of the Ring being a microcosm of the new generation rock bottom, or the 1991 Bash being victimized by the whole Flair firing fiasco. But for this entry, the 1999 King of the Ring will not be a portrait of Federation doldrums. That's because, as noted in the intro, the WWF could really do no wrong at the height of the Attitude Era. Ratings remained staggeringly high, and the WWF was embraced in all corners of pop culture, despite the TV product being filled with very questionable content. For example, in the year or so before this event, the following events took place. Terry Runnels faked a miscarriage. Val Venus almost had his, well, little Val lobbed off with a katana. A demon-plagued Road Warrior Hawk threatened to commit suicide. Beaver Cleavage received an implied, helping hand from his mother. The women's title was given to the loser of a brand panties match. The Undertaker tried to embellish Steve Austin at a mortuary, and a satanic cult carried out actions that looked suspiciously like crucifixions and cross burnings, and Stephanie McMahon was kidnapped by said cult and almost forced into a marriage. Oh, and Big Boss Man got hanged. Fortunately, though, the Hoss boss would recover sufficiently enough to later murder a dog and then steal a casket. The Attitude Era was weird. Today, the social media crowd would relentlessly mock and ridicule any promotion that threw any of, well, that onto their laps, but this was accepted life in the Attitude Era. You know, extreme, crude, and prone to tickling the weird part of your brain that makes you want to rock out to Smash Mouth. So yes, the Attitude Era WWF was very much a, well, product of its time and doesn't hold up particularly well in modern viewings for, well, most people. Another thing that would earn a lot of criticism was the irritatingly short matches. The Vinny Roo Crash TV formula reduced most TV bouts to under 5 minutes runtime, with many more topping out at 2 minutes, and that's with run-ins. You know, even people who spend all day on TikTok wouldn't have their attention span met. To illustrate my point, let's look no further than the 8 qualifying matches for the actual King of the Ring tournament. Only one of them crept past the 3-minute mark. Kane defeating Test in an absolute marathon at 3 minutes and 5 seconds. You know, God only knows how many oxygen tanks those two depleted once they got backstage. And with the win, Kane joined a rather impressive tournament field. You know, a who's who of Attitude Era powers that also included Big Show, Ken Shamrock, X-Pac, Billy Gunn, Road Dogg, Hardcore Holly, and Chyna. Yes, Chyna was the first ever female entrant into the generally all-men's King of the Ring tournament. You know, it was a true history-making occurrence. And the question was, would WWF go all the way and have her clear the field? You know, it was certainly an intriguing prospect. In addition to the tournament, 2 matches with major implications were announced for King of the Ring, one of which was for the WWF Championship. The Undertaker, firmly in his Lord of Darkness / my omnipotence doesn't include having enjoyable matches phase, won the title at Over the Edge the previous month and would defend here against The Rock, following a somewhat random insta-feud that began just 3 weeks earlier. And I say that like it was unconventional, when really almost every feud in the Attitude Era just sprang up randomly and without much warning. Some WWF staffer would just burst into the boardroom in a panic and go, we've got a week to go until the pay-per-view and we've only got 4 matches. And then through like divine luck, a few mid-carders would save the day by either lighting each other on fire or like buying 200 pizzas to the other guy's house or running them over with a lawnmower. And that would set up the feuds, that would set up the matches for the pay-per-view. But the other match was no mere undercard bout, nor was it all that instant. Steve Austin and the McMahons had been at odds on and off for a long time, and their feud took on a new dimension. Now it's time to poke at a sore spot for many fans of the time. See, there was this character affiliated with the corporate ministry called the Higher Power. He was a mysterious, shrouded figure that was apparently the string-pulling hand that rocked the cradle. Even the Undertaker answered to this awing individual. And who could this ominous character be? The internet rumor mill went wild with speculation as to whose head rests beneath the hood. And then it turned out to be Vince. It was Vince. And it's practically a meme now. McMahon removes the hood and grunts, "It's me, Austin." And JR mutters like half-heartedly, "Oh, son of a bitch." While he was probably playing like Go Fish with Jerry Lawler at the commentary desk or something. He sounded bored. Truly, the crusty poses for trading card photo of Shock reveals.
He seems to be running a little low on ideas.
Yeah, it was lame. Seeing as Vince had just turned face over the preceding months, and now it was Austin Vince at square one again. But now there was a twist. After Vince revealed himself as the power of a more favourable height, Linda and Stephanie, through, acting so wooden that Jim Duggan might bop someone over the head with it, expressed restrained indignance at Vince for, orchestrating the kidnapping of his own daughter along the way. A minor trifle, really. So out of spite, the McMahon women sold their ownership shares to, Austin, who now owned 50% to Vince and Shane's 25 apiece. And this was therefore presented as the majority owner. Except not really, because 50% isn't the, majority, and Vince and Shane could have just voted in unison to cancel out any of Austin's decisions, coming together like a wacky transformer called Shints, adorned with a giant pompadour, overactive sweat glands, and a tragic tendency to skip leg day. Nonetheless, to undo the corporate gridlock, Austin would face the McMahon in a corporate ladder match, where all the ownership certificates would be put up in a briefcase and suspended above the ring. Really, this was kind of the first ever Money in the Bank ladder match, so I guess that means the winner could they could cash in the briefcase at any time and challenge for the ownership of another company. Wait, that's how Shane bought WCW! It makes sense! That was a little bit of a spoiler, but trust me, I am doing you a favor because there's no point in going back to watch this thing. Do something more productive. Take up smoking. Besides, a big enough audience already watched it at the time. In all, the 1999 event did 430,000 buys, the most for any King of the Ring to that point. Nearly 20,000 fans sold out the Greensboro Coliseum, another sign of a promotion running extremely hot. And hey, the WWF was the people's clear choice in wrestling. They were, by this time, soundly lapping WCW because they outdid WCW at every turn. WCW had a main event scene filled with aging stars, so WWF created new stars. WCW had a stagnating faction of irreverent rebels, and we'll create a cooler faction of irreverent rebels. WCW thinks they just produced the worst pay-per-view of June 1999. Like hell they did. King of the Ring began with 4 matches on Sunday night's Heat, aka WWF's 0 hour. As in, you'll find 0 worthwhile matches over the course of this hour. Actually, before the cameras began rolling, a still developing prospect, Kurt Angle, lost a dark match to Shawn Stasiak, a result that just sounds confounding in any era. And speaking of confounding, check out this Heat lineup. The Hardy Boys and Edge and Christian went to a no contest after 90 seconds. Mideon and Viscera beat the Big Boss Man in a sub 2 minutes handicap match. Albert beat Val Venus in 2 minutes, and tournament entrant Shamrock beat pay-per-view ladder match participant Shane by DQ in under a minute after Steve Blackman beat Shamrock senselessly with a kendo stick. And now thinking back now, that one might have been Jack's birthday wish. So in all, we're talking 5 minutes and 59 seconds worth of wrestling across just 4 matches. And still, it's probably more wrestling that was in the 2022 Queen's Crown tournament. Thankfully though, that was just the pre-show. Surely the pay-per-view will be much better. Right? We begin with tournament quarters as X-Pac takes on Holly in the battle of two men that you forgot were briefly tag team champions in the New Generation era. This looks like a dandy of a match, being that Sean Waltman is a fiery daredevil and Holly's a reliable performer that has finally found his niche. You know, from a technical standpoint, this is about the only quarter-final bout that looks good. So you'd hope that they give it the time it deserves. Nope. It's over in 3 minutes after Holly gets disqualified for just battering X-Pac with a chair. And in Holly's defense, he was probably just testy because Big Show had crushed him with a car just 6 days earlier. No, really, it's on the network and Peacock. Just go and have a look. But hey, fair play to Holly. So many titles get vacated these days because ligament tears, and this guy's working 6 days after getting teabagged by a hood ornament. No wonder his generation thinks young people are weak. And speaking of show, that brings us to his quarterfinal match with Kane. Surely such a titanic struggle between living, breathing monsters shan't be wasted in the opening round of a tournament, but who are we to judge? I'd like to think we're allowed to judge, you know, the blowing spots, the god-awful ref bump, and the fact that Kane held Big Show in a chokehold for over 3 minutes. Oh! Forget the implausibility of Bob Holly's failed attempt at catching a Buick. If somebody strangled you for 3 minutes, you'd certainly be unconscious, if not deceased. You know, maybe Big Show has a steel plate in his trachea like the one Lex Luger has in his arm. Doubt it though. Anyway, Kane then broke the chokehold and won with a solitary chair shot. This alleged match went 6.5 minutes, 3 of which was an autoerotic asphyxiation mishap waiting to happen. The parade of pushing through unfathomable ailments continued as Shamrock took on a not yet daddy ass, all the while bleeding from the mouth due to internal injuries Blackman had inflicted upon him minutes earlier. Now apparently Shamrock was cleared to compete by WWF's freelance physician, Dr. Nick Riviera.
The knee bone's connected to the something. This
leads to a sub 4 minute stoppage finish after Shamrock was rendered immobile by a powerbomb, and Shamrock's internal organs were like, bye bye everybody. Thus, Billy got to scissor his way to the semis. Yeah, it's not a good impression, that one. It's not one of my best. After those 3 atrocities, we get what turns out to be easily the best match of the quarterfinals as Road Dogg battled Chyna with a My Time era Triple H in her corner. The match wasn't great, but it was definitely acceptable. As the DOGG bumped exuberantly off Chyna's offense, the match was also given time, which is a surprise. It was given over 13 minutes in total. In the end, Road Dogg outsmarted Chyna by nullifying her anticipated low blow attempt as he was wearing an athletic supporter. One pump handle slam later, and Dogg walked out with the victory. Let's take a quick gander at Dave Meltzer's Sacred Snowflakes to see how he rated the quarterfinals back in 1999. And we're averaging less than 1/3 of a star per match. But again, the WWF was making money hand over fist, and people were eating this stuff up. Do you really expect them to care about actual quality when there's a lot of money involved? Which reminds me, if you haven't watched this very series episode on Crown Jewel 2018, then this is your reminder to do so. Well, apparently somebody in the back does care that the quality was sagging, so they sent the Hardys and Edge and Christian back out there for an impromptu rematch from their Heat encounter. You know, we all know that these 4 can deliver. But alas, the rematch didn't even go 5 minutes, though the young quartet did manage to cram in a bunch of daring spots in what little time they had. The Hardys won following a miscue involving Gangrel, who I only can assume was likely irritated that Shamrock stole most of his fake blood for his own use. From there, we go to the semis where Gunn defeated Kane in 5.5 minutes after an interfering Big Show misfired with a chair shot. And when I say misfired, I mean he sort of aimed at Billy, but then swung like a foot higher and whacked the much taller Kane instead. His hand-eye coordination, it was out there. Where was it? But I suppose being deprived of oxygen for 3 minutes can affect many things, one of them being his depth perception at that very moment. After that bit of overcooked attitude fare, we get a match with a curious story. X-Pac versus Road Dogg, with a winner facing their former teammate in the finals. X-Pac is dealing with a neck injury from the Holly match, so does Road Dogg exploit that? No. Could things grow contentious between the 2 remaining DX members? Also, no. So the two know each other really well, so we'll see loads of like clever reversals, sort of outsmarting each other, and it's a no again. Or will the WWF just trot the two out there for a plain as vanilla 3-minute match where X-Pac wins cleanly enough? To borrow a quote from Jumping Jeff Farmer, yep. It was later revealed that Waltman was legitimately dealing with neck issues going into the King of the Ring. So it kind of explains why his matches were kept short. But it doesn't explain why he was booked to wrestle 3 times. But you know, what do I know? So let's look at Dave's updated grades. And hey, we're up to 2/3 of a star per match. It's clear that whether it's 1999 WWF or 2016 TNA, Matt Hardy is carrying the show. And into the marquee bouts we trudge, with Undertaker and The Rock's WWF title match coming up next. Now, you'd think this might be pretty good, but unfortunately, you would be very, very wrong. After all, this is a slower, more plodding Undertaker than the one that would have all those classic WrestleMania matches. Injuries and a less than inspired working style rendered this Taker all gimmick and little else. And The Rock, well, The Rock was capable of having great matches, but especially in this period, it really depended on who he was working with. Austin, yes. Foley, yes. Triple H, yes. But a battered and sluggish dead man, it's time to haul out the smoke and mirrors. And that they did. You know, multiple ref bumps, an arena-spanning brawl, interference, an ether-soaked drag, more interference. Yes, I said an ether-soaked drag. Like this is something out of a match that took place in the Southern Territories in the 60s. But thankfully, The Rock didn't hold it to Undertaker's face for a whole 3 minutes to knock him out, because that would just be dumb. Right, Kane? Right? Anyway, this was 19 minutes of obtuse action beats covering up a lack of a cohesive match, culminating in The Undertaker winning with a tombstone. If I made it sound exciting, my apologies. Sadly, I didn't take an ether-soaked nap for most of it. And even sadder, if the show ends here, it's probably still the 3rd best match of the night. The Rock's loss meant that the heels had won 4 of the last 6 matches, so a pick-me-up would be nice. Well, all that's left was an injured underdog trying to win the King of the Ring, and Austin seeking to take control of the WWF from those dastardly McMahons. Do we get one of the two? Or do we get both? Let's start with the tournament final, shall we? Where a battered X-Pac has to now overcome old friend Billy Gunn. In front of a mostly quiet crowd, X-Pac's quest for the crown fell short, as Gunn polished him off with a top rope Fameasser in just 5.5 minutes. Today, we would be absolutely thrilled to see the Acclaim's father figure win something big, but in 1999, Billy was like a rather rudderless heel that meant even less when separated from his DX cohorts, so the crowd was just totally meh on him winning. What's worse is he didn't even get a coronation ceremony, and that means we were deprived of answering the all-important question, will Billy Gunn insist that the crown be placed on his ass? I mean, come on, King of the Asses, Billy the Royal Ass? This stuff writes itself. So after that bit of deflated cheekery, we come to the ladder match where Austin's star power, Vince's willingness to take a beating, and Shane's stuntman stylings were being counted on to somehow pull this show out of the ditch. But it appears that Shane won't be working, as he's selling the beating Shamrock gave him during the lightning fast skirmish on the pre-show. So instead, Vince tries to sub in Steve Blackman as his partner, only for it to be revealed via GTV hidden camera footage that Shane isn't actually hurt at all. And in other words, Shane gets to main event the pay-per-view, and Blackman doesn't. Well, the ladder match itself was pretty decent, to be honest. A little comedy, a little action, exactly what you'd expect out of an overbooked Austin and McMahon spectacle. You know, there was actually a pretty cool spot where the McMahons got buried under a slew of ladders at the top of the entranceway. And certainly, this was the liveliest thing on the show so far. But then comes the infamous ending. Austin had incapacitated both McMahons and seemed to have a clear path to the ownership papers. Now, he climbed the ladder to reach for the briefcase, only for the case to magically rise up as an unseen somebody was pulling the suspension cable. In the end, Shane ended up with the briefcase and the McMahons assumed full ownership once again, while heroic Austin get screwed. To this very day, you'll see the occasional post on Reddit or a fan-made video on YouTube calling for speculation as for who the mystery person that raised the briefcase was. But this question is asked because in the eyes of many, the WWF never revealed who the assailant was. But they did. Badly, but they did. The case raiser was none other than Big Boss Man. See, one of the stipulations was that because Austin beat Boss Man on previous week's Raw, all corporate ministry members were barred from getting involved in this match. For losing, Boss Man was kicked out of the ministry, which explains why he faced ministry members Viscera and Mideon on the pre-show. On the Raw the night after King of the Ring, a seemingly babyface Boss Man went to confront Vince and the entire group inside the ring, but instead merrily reunited with them. That's because him being kicked out of the ministry was only so he could circumvent the stipulation to interfere in the ladder match, raising the briefcase up, since he was, not a member of the ministry at the time of the match. Anyway, the WWF did a really lousy job explaining Boss Man being the one that pulled up the briefcase, latently glossing over it before moving on to the next story point. So the next time somebody on Reddit or whatever brings up this angle and acts like the mystery was never solved, just show them this part of the video. It'll have the benefit of inflating the view count, so really, in this scenario, we all win. Let's check out the final ratings and see how they go. That's 10 stars in total in 10 matches, or 1 star per match. If Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay ever had a 3-hour Iron Man match at the Tokyo Dome that causes Dave to whap out 10 of the coveted golden stars, it will have single-handedly equaled the total ratings of this entire show, well, in one man's opinion anyway. As of this video on the Cage Match database, the 1999 King of the Ring holds a 3.81 average rating out of a possible 10. 3 out of every 4 respondents give the show a 4 or lower. But who are we to scoff? The audience of the day was by no means turned off by such a bad pay-per-view. Hell, the next night on Raw, Austin beat Undertaker to regain the WWF Championship, a match that drew the highest ever American cable TV viewership for a wrestling match in history. At one point, there were over 10.7 million viewers watching the title change. Today, when Raw hits 1.9 million viewers, that's cause for a big celebration. In summation, mocking the Attitude Era is tricky. It's hard to ridicule something that did record-breaking metrics and was a central part of the pop cultural zeitgeist in its day. Sure, the wrestling itself is superior today, but it hasn't captured the lightning in a bottle the way that all the silly, outlandish BS from the late 90s did. And chances are, it never will. But that's the fun of a democracy. No matter how powerful or successful the reign, we're more than happy to laugh at an emperor's lack of clothes, or, appropriate for this case, a king's.